You're listening to the Self-Made is a Myth, Make a Difference Together show with your host, Coach Tim Campsall, where we talk with successful business owners to hear the stories of their journeys in building their successful businesses. And more importantly, we recognize the folks who help them excel because we know that achieving business success is not something we can do on our own.
Hello, everyone. This is Coach Tim Campsall, and I'm excited to have a fellow business owner from Indiana with us today. Something unique about my guest is that she has combined her craftsmanship with having a social impact, and we'll have her explain that to us here in a little bit. In her downtime, she enjoys designing and thinking about what she's going to create next, and she's most proud of how the company that she's developed empowers marginalized folks and their voices through skilled trades. It's my pleasure to welcome Consuelo to the show today. Hi, Consuelo.
Hi.
Hey, let's start with having you introduce yourself. So tell us your full name and a little bit about you personally, your personal story, like where you were born and live and family and hobbies.
Yeah. So my name is Consuelo Poland Lockhart. So I was born in Guatemala, adopted when I was 3, was raised by a family up in northern Michigan. So I grew up in Traverse City, Michigan. And, I think from a very young age, I knew that art was always going to be my career path. So I always dreamed of going to like an art school and like really just kind of living that romantic kind of like starving artist like lifestyle. But I think like I always thought I was going to be an illustrator, and then throughout high school I kind of started thinking, what's another path potentially for me. Growing up, never heard about the trades. So it's kind of funny that like for basically all of my childhood and college, it's like, oh, if you don't have a college degree, that kind of hinders your chances at like a career. And then funny enough, I fell into welding just kind of like by accident. And so my long-term dream is to basically open up an all women's welding school in Guatemala. So yeah, it's just kind of funny how things kind of change and can happen overnight almost.
Yeah, that is awesome. So tell us a little bit more about that. The what I said in your introduction in terms of that combining the craftsmanship with the social impact.
Yeah. So I think a lot of industries, not well, there are several industries that I think are really more male dominated. And so when I was in college, I ended up changing my career focus from industrial design to functional art. And so when I was looking at different paths to possibly like switch over to, I was like, okay, well, I don't have any woodworking experience, but maybe this is something that, I could learn. And so that's, I think, where I had more creative freedom. That's really what led me to functional art versus like furniture design or interior design, because I think there was a lot more structure, and you're really like you're designing for a client, not necessarily like conceptually thinking about what it is that you want your concentration to be.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the most appealing things that really just resonated with me when I was considering those paths. When it came to jumping into functional art, I was given that opportunity to really work with my hands. And as I started learning more about woodworking, I realized, oh, it's a male dominated field. My program itself was male dominated. So I think I just happened to keep choosing things that were a little bit more male dominated. But it also kind of made me a little bit sad that like growing up in high school, in like middle school, junior high, like as a woman and as a Latina, I never really had outlets in Traverse City that I felt like I could really like understand more of like my heritage. I didn't really get to see people who look like me. And then I also just I wasn't encouraged to like explore maybe like woodworking or some of the other kind of like trades or hands-on type of skills.
Yeah.
So this was kind of like almost like a fresh start for me, where I'm like, okay, I can put together all of the different like skills I've developed over the years and really focus on that. And so for one project, I actually had a professor that was like, okay, we're going to start using materials we've never used before. And so I was like, well, I mean, I've only used wood so far, so I don't know if I should like, I don't know what other materials I could even consider. And so he encouraged me to try metal. And so I was like, okay, well, what, I don't know how to do any of that. And so another professor, she actually showed me how to weld. And it was almost like instantaneously, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier, more forgiving than woodworking is, because I was already kind of struggling with like craftsmanship and like, I think for me, I'm just not necessarily a patient person. So, obviously woodworking is a lot more like you have to be checking twice, cutting once, or
Yeah.
maybe 4 times. And so for me, I'm like, I kind of just like the idea to be able to kind of work a little bit more spontaneously versus having to
Yeah.
do so much pre-planning. And so that's kind of just where it started. And I think like after I graduated college, I was like, I really don't know what I want to do with my BFA in functional art. All my professors were like, you can do whatever you want, but it's like, that's also overwhelming to not know
Yeah.
maybe what a good starting path is, especially like getting some sort of advice from your professors who've worked with you for the last 4 or 5 years. And so I kind of just took like the following summer to kind of think about, what do I go back to school? Do I go get my master's? If I do get my master's, like what do I want to get my master's
Sure.
in? What skills do I think I could possibly build off of? And welding just happened to be one that I kept seeing, like, there was a really like big demand in welding, especially for women. And so I'm like, okay, I got a grant to go back to school. And so I did an 18-week job training program. And I think when I was going through that program, it just kind of hit me because forever I was always like, how do I get back to Guatemala? How do I make an impact? How do I kind of like make my family proud or build some sort of reputation to kind of like show my family, like, even though I was put up for adoption, I didn't get to grow up with them. This is something that like I'm taking the opportunity that I got
Yeah.
in growing up here to like do something impactful. Um, and so welding, I was just like, you know what, Guatemala's not really known they don't for much outside of like maybe what you typically think, which is like coffee, fair trade, mission trips, things like that. And I'm like, well, what's something that could be like sustaining
Mm.
to the economy? And so I'm like, maybe that's welding. I don't know. Maybe that's, and it just kind of clicked for me one day. I was like, this is what I want to do. And I told a few people and they're like, yeah, that's crazy. I don't know how you're going to do that. So it was an idea for about 4 years, I would say. Um, and I was just kind of like, I don't know how to get started. I'm like, a school would be a for-profit, and then I don't have a business background. I didn't do any work with nonprofits before, so I don't even know how the structure would have worked. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, well, I guess it's kind of trial and error. And so it just that kind of like kickstarted my journey of like starting to learn and really focus in like what kind of leadership skills and things like that can I start exploring. So
Yeah, very cool. So tell us more about the company. What do you guys do?
mhm.
What's the name and how do you help people?
Yeah, so I moved to Indianapolis in 2016. And so when I moved down to Indianapolis, I was kind of like, this is kind of a fresh start for me. I'm done with school. I already kind of have an idea of what I want to do. But I really just want to make sure that I am like sticking to my gut and like staying in the creative field. So any job that I wanted to get, I really wanted to just focus on the art side of things.
Mm.
I didn't want to get like a corporate job where I'm sitting behind a desk. So I'm like, it's really important for me to stay out and just kind of get to meet more artists in the community, see what the Latino community is doing down here. I kind of already had a good feel of what was happening back in Grand Rapids. Um, and so when I ended up getting a job as a makerspace director, so I was able to kind of help mold what that kind of community would look like. And so through that, I kind of just felt like it was the right time, the right place. I had there was some shared welding equipment there too. So I was like, you know what, maybe I just pilot that and see, kind of just see what happens from that. And then I contemplated like, well, what would like, what would be the mission, the objective of a group of people coming together? Who would it be for? And then obviously the name was also kind of like another thing. But through my role as a director at the Makerspace, one of the things that we were doing was that we were working with the creatives, the entrepreneurs, and anybody who was a member at the space, and trying to get them to go through these business focused workshops. So like we had attorneys, accountants, and they would be talking about like, good business practices. And so through a connection with one of the attorneys, I told her like, hey, I have this idea. I don't know what type of entity it needs to be. And like, I'm like, would you be able to help me and like maybe figure out what it is that I need to be doing? Because I don't know if it's ready to be, it's a business yet. I don't know where I am.
Sure.
And so luckily the attorney, she was like heard me out, and she was like, I think you need to file, and these are kind of your options. And so then I decided to be I guess a 501(c)(3). And so when we started looking at that process, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know all the things I need to do. And so, she kind of walked me through how to like figure out the name. And so for me, I was like, I don't really know a lot of organizations or businesses that are named Latinas. And I think just as like a Guatemalan, I really loved the idea of being able to have something that was empowering to not just Guatemalans, but other Latinas. Because I feel like we're kind of a group that gets overlooked a lot. And, I never really got invited to some of these larger conversations. So for me, I'm like, I think the empowerment behind it being like, this is Latina led, Latina owned, Latina ran,
Yeah.
and focusing on empowering Latinas, because like I mentioned earlier, I never got to be in the same room with women that look like me,
Mm.
or even people that looked like me who might have came from like a similar situation. So
Sure.
it's like, I really want to have this safe space for people to come together to feel like and understand that, even though we may have gone through different different journeys, we do have some similarities. And so everyone can connect on one level, if anything. And so I settled on Latinas Welding Guild. I knew guild kind of was like a collective group of people. So I was really thinking about that. And then even with the logo, I was like, I would love it to not be so masculine, because if you look around at
Sure.
manufactured logos and, branding kits and all of that, everything is so masculine, and it feels, I don't want to say cold, but it doesn't have that warmth behind it.
Yeah.
And so that's where I really wanted the cultural side to be shining through. And then if you do look at our logo, we have flowers around the helmet, and each of those flowers is a national flower from a Latin country.
Mm.
So obviously it's not all of the countries, but it was just like kind of the
Yeah.
main backgrounds for some of the women that went through the first cohort and the first couple. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
Wow.
I mean, I definitely give it a lot of thought. And I think even to this day, like there's confusion, like, oh, we're Latinas Welding Guild, that means we only serve Latinas. And it's like now it's kind of evolved into like it's really more about the women leading. Like we're setting up opportunities for the community. It's not necessarily just for us. And we were only doing women's welding classes, but now we're doing all adults. We're doing youth. We're doing custom fabrication. I'm now doing some contract work as a consultant, and we're providing teaching services. So, I mean, it's like, it's really evolved into a lot more, which I think is great, because now it's changed the narrative from like us just serving Latinas to now it's like Latinas are actually serving the community.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. What's been your biggest learning as a business owner?
I don't know, because I feel like I learned a lot. A lot of it has been trial and error. I think one of the big takeaways is that like, if I can't give up necessarily, like, and I also know that's just me, I don't want to give up. Um, and it's like sometimes if I'm going through, like I'm having to balance and juggle a bunch of stuff all at the same time, sometimes it's easy to lose sight as to like why I'm in this role and why I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
So I always have to remind myself, it's like, yes, I might be doing the work, but it does mean something to other people. And if I give up, then what am I like telling them?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, there's certainly being a business owner is can be a tough gig, right? And there's times where, right, it is hard and overwhelming and stressful, and right, it's easy to think those thoughts of, might it just be easy to give up? So I'm glad to hear that you're hanging in there and pushing through, because you're making a big impact in the community. So
yeah. Well, also too, I think like some people have this romantic idea of what it means to be a business owner. And it's like, even if someone has an idea and like their intention is to run a business, some people are just not built to run a business. And I think that's like the hardest thing that people don't understand. Cause I mean, I know there've been several times where I'm like questioning if I should really be in school. I'm like, I don't, it's like, I'm
yeah,
willing to ask the questions and show up to the table. And
yeah,
I think in some ways, like, I have been very fortunate enough to be able to create a seat at the table for myself.
yeah,
And then even just having people who may have not necessarily not like known a lot about me, but they're like, oh, I think this is actually the direction we want to go. And like, so
yeah,
they are kind of trusting me enough to come
yeah.
and have a seat.
Yeah, the reality of the fact is that there's no training on how to, or usually no training on how to become a business owner, right? Being a business owner is a profession, just like being a lawyer or being a doctor, but the school
Yeah.
system doesn't teach us how to be business owners. But that when we do step back and take the time to learn how to be a great business owner, it
Mhm.
does become a lot easier. But again, it's a profession. It
Yeah.
takes time and effort and opportunities to learn and grow to be a great business owner.
Well, and even thinking about degrees, because I know that also kind of comes up sometimes, is like, it's like I have a bachelor's of fine arts, and here I am, nonprofit. I've been a high school welding instructor. It's like I've had a variety of different types of experiences that I think have helped mold me in or given me some of those skills that maybe that help me now today. But I also do think a lot of people tend to put a lot of pressure on a degree.
Yeah,
Like, oh, just because there's a teacher that has a teaching degree doesn't mean that they necessarily can connect with students.
sure.
Just like a business owner, just because you went and got a business degree doesn't mean you know how to work with clients, or like, you can understand
Well,
how
the
to
reality
manage
is
staff.
a business degree doesn't actually teach you how to be a business owner, right? It teaches you how to be a business person in a corporation, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so there still is a very significant learning curve on how to be a business owner. So to that point, we know that success doesn't come in isolation. So what's been one of your biggest challenges over the years, and who's someone who came alongside you and helped you through that?
Well, yeah, I think like for me, it's like, I don't know what I don't know. So for me, sometimes I'm like, okay, how do I get to know all the things? And it's like I know that not naturally being a patient person, that's a little difficult sometimes. And I'm like, I wish I could just wave a wand and bam, I just know like all the things I need to know. And so I think it's kind of like, and like I've had to do this ever since I got started, but it's like, I try to have conversations with people that might be doing something similar. I never will necessarily find someone who's doing exactly the same thing. But it's also knowing how to like filter out advice and perspectives from other people, and being able to kind of like piece things together that makes sense for me. I think when I first started, like I started noticing that like if I was going to somebody asking for advice, I kind of was like, I feel like you're kind of being a little biased. So I don't want to like take all of your advice on
Yeah.
some things. And so it's kind of like, I think when you're first starting, that's kind of tough.
Mm,
And so now it's kind of like I'm still working through some of that balancing and finding like a good mentor. So that's been one of the toughest things, is find a mentor who can understand the nonprofit world and also understand, this is a business.
yeah.
We have to make, obviously, if we don't have money, we can't make an impact. We can't
Yes.
keep staff. We can't
Yes.
do all of these things
Right.
we want to
Yeah.
do. And so that's been something, but I would say that like, I finally started being able to pay myself a salary, which was also kind of difficult for me to kind of accept like that, I need to get paid. I think
Yeah.
for me, it was never really about the money, but then at some point it's like, well, if I want to do this full time, like I, I
Yeah.
have to
It
get
has to
paid.
be about the money. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not only that, but it's like, proving to our funders that like, because I think more and more organizations and foundations and funders are starting to realize that it's a lot of executive directors or founders are working overtime and not paying themselves to
Yeah.
then the point where if they leave, the organization isn't self-sustaining because everything was falling on the executive director.
Yes. Yes.
And it shows the health and the intention of like the organization, like, everyone matters, including the founder.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've known plenty of founders who've not paid themselves, and I feel like that's kind of like a common thing that you keep hearing about. Oh, business owners don't pay themselves probably until like year 5 or something.
It's probably the biggest mistake that business
Yeah,
owners make. And what we teach is even if it's just $100, right? Pay yourself $100, and then next month or in 6 months, pay yourself $500, and right, and gradually creep it up. Because if we don't, there's a psychological burden of, right, I'm doing all this for free, I'm doing all this for naught, right? And why? And so why? Yes. So yeah, great point. And the other thing you talked about, that nonprofits still need to make money. I think that's the other, fault or mistake that people make is, well, it's a nonprofit, so it doesn't have to be profitable, or we don't need to run it according to, business best practices. No, it's
yeah.
that the company has to make money in order to do the mission work, right?
Yeah. And I even have recently heard that from a couple staff because they're like, this is starting to feel like a business. And it's like, it is a business. Like, I
Yeah,
think that's what you don't understand. It's like,
yeah,
I have poured so much of myself, my time, my energy, my sanity into like having this organization continue to run. And like, obviously, like I think a lot of business owners or just business in general don't want to talk about the struggle because it's like people don't want to hear about the bad stuff. They only
yeah,
want to hear about the good, but it's
yeah.
like in order for us to have the good, we had to struggle and go through some.
Yes, exactly.
And so, for me, I'm like, because this has more been a mindset change for me too, thinking about it more as a business versus a nonprofit. Because I think, how can I expect the community, other people that are coming to the organization to try to get help, if they don't see us as a legitimate business or they don't have that respect, like, hey, it does cost them something to like help me. And, that's the staff also has to get paid.
Yes.
No, it's like, then I can't I can't blame them if we're not running like that and we don't have that mindset, then we can't get mad if somebody is like, "Hey, I expect everything for free."
Yeah.
Because, clients or like people that come and try to get help, other community organizations, like I think from like an outside perspective, people are like, "You're a charity. You should like, isn't this your job to do everything for free?" And
Yeah.
it's like, no.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
would you go to like Walmart and expect to get a bunch of free stuff from them? It's like we have to also make money.
Absolutely. Well, even on the donor side, right? The donor wants to make sure
Yeah,
that they see that you're using their money well, and that you're efficient and effective, and right, and that the money's not just being drained and wasted. So yeah, I
yeah,
think it's
exactly. We're
important.
not buying Lamborghinis with
Yeah,
with brands and
exactly.
stuff. So
Consuelo, I'm gonna put you on the spot here a little bit and
yeah.
ask you to pick 3 people in your business owner journey that you're most grateful for them being there to help you with the business's growth. Who are those 3 people and how they help you?
So I would definitely say that like when I was getting started, my friend Charles House, so he was is a welding instructor at a local community college here in Indianapolis. Like, I think him being at the very beginning of my journey, there were plenty of times where I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I think I should just give up. But he's always been behind me, pushing me like, hey, like, oh, you need some technical assistance. Like he's always been willing to like provide that technical side where I felt like didn't feel like I was as strong.
Mm.
And even to this day, like we're still really great friends and we still like are like we're still going. And so he's always been pushing me to think bigger and like have that technical support. Plus he's also opened a lot of doors for me. So being a man in the industry, I feel like sometimes you need those advocates
Sure.
and allies to kind of help get your name out there.
Yeah.
And so that he's been a really big influence. I don't want to sound cheesy, but I would also say my husband, because
Yeah.
when we first started dating, it was basically around a little bit after I had actually just gotten started. I had
Okay.
just launched the organization as an official organization.
Yeah.
I think at that time I was doing a lot of hand drafting when it came to some of the fabrication work that I wanted to do. So even as like a creative and as a professional, like he has like the software, the apps, like the more like computer tech side of experience. And so he's also had experience running as a consultant, helping other small businesses, other larger organizations, even some organizations that I come in contact in my network
Sure.
of groups. And so I think that he really helped me with like developing some of those business tools that I think I really just was lacking. And it
Sure.
also helped me just think about branding wise and some of the maybe the pieces that I wasn't necessarily thinking of.
Yeah.
So he's always a support. And then I would say that like over the last year and a half, like I have a deputy director. Her name's Jessica Rodriguez Hernandez, and so she we met right before the shutdowns happened during COVID. And so were initially meeting just to see how our two groups could work together. COVID happened, and then we reconnected after COVID. And so I asked her if she would join my board.
Mm.
So she ended up becoming our board president. And so I think she could kind of see like what my needs were, and then kind of help guide me in some of that. Cause I'm like, man, a board of directors is a whole different animal. You gotta manage as well. And so last January, so January 2023, she took a step down from board president and then joined as my deputy director. So I think she really has helped on the operations side. Like, I think she definitely has helped me like take all of the ideas swirling around in my head and
Yeah.
really help me like focus and prioritize. I think like still staying to our mission, but also helping with the strategic planning.
Yeah.
So it's like really helping me get things going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
right now we're still stabilizing because we've had so much growth, but it's like, I wouldn't have been able to do it without her.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's something that a lot of founders go through. They tend to be more the visionary type person,
Yeah.
right? Big picture and oftentimes can't land the plane. So having a strong operations person, right, a detail oriented person that can take the concept and the idea and flush out the how, right, and the processes and the procedures. It's kind of like the yin and yang idea, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because, I think she was coming from corporate world and it's like, I don't have like corporate experience. So it's like for me, I also just, like you said, visionary, but it's like, I can't just stay in the day-to-day stuff, which I was like really stuck in. And
Yeah,
so I think like that, her being able to like alleviate that for me has also been like really crucial.
that's awesome.
Because I don't think we would have been able to like necessarily, I think it would have been slower, but I don't think we would have been able to grow as like maybe efficiently.
The thing a lot of folks don't necessarily appreciate or understand is that growth brings chaos. Right.
Oh, yes.
So, right. We want to grow because that means we can help more people or serve more people. But if we don't have the systems and the processes in place, right, the growth becomes extremely chaotic. So I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear that you guys are focusing on that. That's awesome. As you think about the next 1 to 3 years, what do you see as your number one priority or the biggest challenge that you're going to need to overcome in order to achieve your goals?
Um, so I mean, I think money is always a number one, obviously like consistent revenue streams is always like a tough one. I think also just because we're a training provider, so it's like we're kind of on that, like we're an educator, but we're also a nonprofit. We're in welding, but we're also getting more into the trades and manufacturing. So it's like we're really in this gray area of being able to blend a lot of different, I think, businesses into under one roof.
Yeah.
I think definitely one of the biggest challenges I would say outside of money is finding the right talent, finding the right people. Just because, like half of our team is coming from like nonprofit world, so they understand like, and they're all mission driven, so they're like, I really want to help people.
Yeah.
And we have some other staff that might have industry experience, but they may not necessarily be thinking about, okay, how do I make an impact in the community?
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, now they're getting introduced to nonprofit world and understanding, oh, it is about helping people, but
Yeah.
like now you got to learn more of the soft skills. And unfortunately, I think within like the manufacturing and at least the welding world, like professionalism looks differently there than it does in like a corporate or
Sure.
office setting.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's like, I do think that like we kind of have to mold the ideal employee as best as we can. Like you said, there's chaos everywhere. So
Yeah.
that it's like, chaos is going around, and we're also trying to search for the people that understand what it is that we're trying to do, that they're doers. They understand that like this is a commitment and that we want to continue to grow and be able to like be able to offer competitive wages. We
Yeah.
want to be able to offer benefits, but it's like if we're not all doing our part
Yes.
and because we're a really small team, so obviously if one person's not pulling their weight, then it affects everybody else.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Um, that, we can't make it unless everyone's a part of it. And like, they understand it is a commitment, and that they keep remembering it's for the students.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not a personal, like, oh, maybe, there's a personal, like, relationship that you're like, I don't really like this person on the team, but it's like, you're not doing it for that person. You're doing it for the student. Like,
Yes.
that's what we have to all remember.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what you're saying it resonates with me in terms of culture, right? Just
Yeah.
making sure that we've got clarity on what is the culture, and that we're hiring people who are aligned to the culture. We're reinforcing the culture, and when we do that, it sort of it takes away the challenge that you've referenced a couple times of, well, some people think we're a nonprofit, some people think we're a business. Like it doesn't even matter, right? It's like, here's our culture,
Yeah.
right? And you're either part of it or you're not. You believe in it or you don't, and it doesn't matter, right? That we happen to be a nonprofit, because we're in business to make a difference, right? In the way that that our vision has dictated us to, and here are the types of people that we need, and here's what you need to think and believe and feel, and
Yeah.
if that's you, then you're going to be an awesome addition to our team.
Yeah, exactly. And just even developing culture, it's like, when I first started welding, like my personal experience of being like the only woman in my class, the only woman on staff when I got my first welding job. I was the only Latina in both of those situations. So it's like, I have been the only woman in the room sometimes. I've been the only Latina in the room sometimes. So
Yeah.
it's like, how can I create a safe space that, I wish I would have had when I was starting up, and how do we build that for the other people that are
Yes.
maybe going through some personal stuff and they don't quite see their, I don't want to say value, but I know that has been a common thing when we've interviewed students, that sometimes they don't feel like they have value or that they matter in the community.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course you do.
Yeah, yeah, fair. Last question. Jim Rohn says that we become the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. So, Consuelo, as you think about that quote, what advice would you have for business owners who are trying to do it on their own?
I mean, it's tough because it's like not just one thing. It's like, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mm.
I think sometimes we don't want to ask for help because we don't want to admit that we don't know something. And it's like, what I try to tell like my staff and anybody who's around me, I'm like, I will actually respect you more if you ask me for help, because I love the fact that you're trying to better yourself. And I think it took one person to say that to me at one point, where they're like, you need to ask for help because like no one expects you to know all the things. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's true. And I'm like, but I do think it shows initiative, like you're willing to learn if you're willing to ask for help. So that was always like a big thing I think that stuck out for me. And also obviously like don't give up. Like you can always pivot. And that's the thing. I think people are so quick to just taking the easy way out, which is quitting or not doing it or just not even trying. And I'm like, the hardest thing is like, just taking that first step and just sticking with it. So it's really you're building your own reputation. And that to me, I take pride in the fact that like, I know at the end of the day, I have done my best and I have not given up. So that's really like all you can really do, I guess. But
fair enough. That makes a ton of sense. So Consuelo, it sounds like you've been blessed with some pretty incredible people throughout your business owner journey. If they were all here on the show today, what would you want to say to them?
Thanks for not letting me quit. and then probably like helping me keep my sanity, but also like helping me keep perspective, because I know like when you're in the chaos, it's sometimes hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
And like I think for me it can be very overwhelming and can sometimes feel like the world is literally crashing, and it's like how do I get myself out of it? So it's like the perspective from other people who are like, it's really not as bad as you think. I'm like, okay.
Consuelo, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Self-Made is a Myth show. Please help spread this movement by liking and subscribing to our show and following us on Facebook and LinkedIn. To join our movement, go to bemadtogether.com. Okay, folks, that's a wrap. Please pay it forward and be sure to tune in next time to the Self-Made is a Myth podcast.